Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, that's much better. I know it's about 2 feet of snow outside, and some of your cars are probably still stuck in the driveway. But good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right. My name is Todd Sutter. I serve as the program director for the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center on the African American Male, part of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here at The Ohio State University. On behalf of my supervisor, Dr. James Moore, who's the director of the Bell National Resource Center, as well as Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of Outreach and Engagement, Dr. Valerie Lee. I want to welcome you to an evening with Dr. Wilburn H. Weddington. It was my privilege to organize this program to highlight, I believe, which I believe is one of the giants here at The Ohio State University and here in the city of Columbus. I had received an email from Dr. Johnson about hosting this event and also getting information about the biography that they recently completed on Dr. Weddington's life. And so as I worked with the staff to put this program together, I had the opportunity to read his biography. I read about the challenges he faced in his childhood in the rural South and the resolve he had to become a medical doctor as he matriculated through Morehouse College, then Howard University in their College of Medicine, onto his residency in Kansas City, and then his eventual journey here to The Ohio State University in the city of Columbus. His story reminds me of what has now become one of my favorite quotes from the late, great Dr. Benjamin E. Mays, and this is something that Dr. Moore, who's the director in office, he likes to use this quote a lot. And I believe this is a great quote to describe Dr. Weddington. It goes, "It must be borne in mind that the tragedy of life doesn't lie in not reaching your goals. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not a disaster to be unable to capture your ideal, but it is a disaster to have no ideal to capture. It is not a disgrace not to reach the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is sin." And definitely with Dr. Weddington, there was no low aim. Again, I thank you for coming out to tonight's program. It is my pleasure now to introduce our speakers. First, starting with Dr. Wilburn Weddington. His extraordinary journey to the Ohio State University's Department of Family Medicine began in the cotton fields on a sharecropper's farm in Hiram, Georgia, 80 years ago. Growing up during the Great Depression in the 1930s, Weddington saw no black doctors practicing medicine near Hiram. However, he was fortunate to have contact with George Ragsdale, a white doctor who made his rounds visiting blacks living in the backwoods of Georgia. The young Weddington keenly observed Ragsdale's care of his grandmother, and despite the racial and social barriers Weddington faced in the Deep South, he envisioned his future not as a field hand, but as a physician. A minimal education was the main obstacle Weddington had to overcome in pursuit of his dream to enter the medical profession. By the time Weddington finished the 7th grade, his father took him to Douglasville, Georgia to attend Hutchinson High School. While in Douglasville, Weddington wrote Morehouse President Dr. Charles D. Hubert for assistance to attend college. Hutchinson only served grades 9 through 11, and Weddington knew he would have to further his education in order to have a viable chance at becoming a doctor. Dr. Hubert got him a job cleaning wax off the floors in several dormitories to assist with tuition, and Weddington enrolled in Morehouse as a biology major during the fall of 1941. After graduating from Morehouse in 1944, Weddington went on to complete his MD from Howard University. He returned to Georgia after finishing his internship at Kansas City General Hospital No. 2 and opened a family practice in Marietta in 1949. He spent 5 years in Marietta before being called to serve as a captain at Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Weddington immediately began to serve the African American community by opening a small office near Mount Vernon Avenue. He also established professional connections with doctors from Ohio State's family medicine staff. Dr. Weddington joined the medical faculty at Ohio State as an instructor in 1969 while still running his Mount Vernon practice. He supervised OSU medical students and began to publish peer-reviewed articles on topics ranging from physical examinations to surgical procedures. Dr. Weddington also continued his important work in the African American community by developing the Hilltop Health Center in 1975, and he co-founded the Columbus chapter of the National Medical Association. In 1980, Dr. Weddington became a clinical associate professor in family medicine at Ohio State. He continued to research and publish in medical journals, often focusing on lack of access to health care for Blacks living in urban areas. In 1991, Dr. Weddington was appointed Associate Dean in the College of Medicine at OSU, the first African American to hold this post, and played a vital role in recruitment, admissions, and advising of minority students. Dr. Weddington retired from his administrative duties at OSU in 1995. He is presently one of Morehouse College's oldest living graduates, and he continues to offer his professional expertise in family medicine to the Weddington Society of Future Physicians and Association of Minority Pre-Medical Students established in his honor. Dr. Jessica A. Johnson is an opinion columnist for the Athens Banner Herald and a special correspondent for the Columbus Dispatch. Dr. Johnson's writings and research examine racial and social issues in education, sports, popular culture, and politics. Salt of the Earth, Georgia Boy, co-authored with Dr. Wilbur Weddington, is Dr. Johnson's first book, which won the 2013 Excellence Award in Research from the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. During her tenure as an English professor at Central State University, Dr. Johnson has lectured in the History Department at Capital University, taught English at Columbus State Community College, and lectured in the Comparative Studies in African American and African Studies departments at Ohio State University. Last and certainly not least, Kim Weddington. Kim Weddington is the youngest of the 3 children born to Dr. Wilbur Weddington and the late Patricia Norrie Walls Weddington. Kim grew up watching her father take care of Columbus's Mount Vernon community during the 1950s and 60s. She describes her father as the wind beneath my wings in his biography, Salt of the Earth, Georgia Boy, acknowledging that he is her rock and best friend. Kim resides in Columbus and is a receptionist for WVKO 1580 AM, the Praise radio station, and a stylist for Duluth's Beauty Salon. I asked that if, I was going to say if you have your cell phone, everybody has a cell phone. If you could please take up your cell phones and make sure to either put them on silent or vibrate, and ask you to please give Dr. Johnson a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Good evening. It is really an honor and a privilege to be before you to discuss such a great man as Dr. Weddington. As I've been talking with some people out in the audience, Dr. Weddington's very modest, even with his great life achievements, but I keep telling him, you kind of are a big deal. And we definitely feel that way in the Columbus community about him. First, before I get started, I would like to thank the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for hosting this event. So again, thanks to Mr. Todd Suddiff, Dr. Lee, Dr. James Moore, and Eric Choi, who definitely worked with me in getting this program prepared. And starting out with looking at Dr. Weddington's life, for those of you who have read the book, you can definitely see truly what hard work was growing up during the Depression era in Georgia, during the Jim Crow South. I did not really know what hard work was until I read his story. I was just thinking when he described things as during laundry, they had Mondays for wash day, where he would get in a buggy with his grandfather to go pick up the laundry from the white families that they washed for in Hiram, Georgia. And so after they picked the clothes up, they had to bring them back, get several pots of boiling water. Dr. Weddington's grandmother actually made the soap that they used to wash the clothes, and she made it out of lye soap. And so then they had to, after they got all that together, scrub the clothes on the washboard and then hang them out to dry and hope that there'd be a sunny day in Georgia. So when you think about that, I remember in college I used to dread doing laundry. And after reading that, I was like, that was nothing compared to what Dr. Weddington had to go through. I began the book with a quote from Proverbs 22:29, which says, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." And when I look at that, just the fact of Dr. Weddington's diligent work ethic, his resolute faith in God, and he talks throughout the book about his faith, how God made a way when there was no way, when it didn't seem as if he was going to have enough money to pay his tuition. And I know current students, if you're dealing with financial aid, if you had those types of struggles, you can identify a little bit. Dr. Weddington was going to school full time and usually working at least 2 or 3 jobs in addition to studying. So that was a lot to bear even during his time coming up. And I also, just as I was writing his story, reflecting on my own college experience, that I didn't have to work. I was very privileged as to be a full scholarship recipient. I didn't know what it was like to have to work and have to go to school. So you really see through Dr. Weddington's story how his hard work paid off and how his faith paid off. And also, before I go any further, I'd like to recognize my pastor in the audience, Pastor Carter. Pastor Carter prayed me through this project. And so if any of you have attempted to write a book, it took us 5 years once we got started back in late 2007. So it was really almost like writing another dissertation for me, but definitely a lot more challenging. So with that, I'd like to get into our slide presentation. What I did, I took several slides from the book to just tell you Dr. Weddington's story in a shortened version. And after we go through the slides, then we will have remarks from Dr. Weddington and also from his daughter Kim. And then we will open up the floor for questions from you, the audience. Okay, starting with the first slide, this is Annie Mae Moore, who, as a young woman, and this was Dr. Weddington's mother. This is his grandmother, Viola, and being from the South, Viola was a common name. I had a great aunt named Viola, and I'm also from Georgia. This is one of his aunts, his great aunt Anna, who was a domestic and worked in Buckhead, Georgia, which is still a very wealthy place, people with money. And she, her story was interesting. She would go on long trips with the family that she worked for. She worked for a family by the last name of Dukes. And so they would take her with them, and she would get nice things that they discarded. So if any of you had family who worked as domestic, my grandmother was a domestic in Athens, Georgia. And so with Aunt Anna, she would bring back like nice silverware. She would, anything that they thought would be nice for her to use. She also had what Dr. Weddington described as the intentional shakes. So when she would pick up her coffee, her hand would tremble just a little bit, but not to the point of spilling over her coffee. But you can also see she was a church-going woman, and that sign even reminds me, growing up in Athens, Georgia, we don't have a sign like this in front of my church now, but you see her attire, the white gloves, the women used to wear those back in the day, so you can definitely see the history there. The man at the bottom, this young man, was Dr. Weddington's father, Earl Weddington. And so Earl Weddington met Annie Mae Moore in 1920 at a revival at New Hope Church. And so in 1920, they still do this a little bit in Hiram, but they had what was called big meeting time. So all the churches would get together during August and they would have great revival services. So another thing that I was able to relate very well to Dr. Weddington was summer revivals. I went to one this past year at my church and it brought back a lot of memories. And when they would have these get-togethers, now you know in the South we like to eat. And so they had everything that you could imagine. You know, fried chicken, fried rabbit, cornbread, sweet potato pie. I mean, everything was just laid out. So when his parents met in 1920, Dr. Weddington, after they got married, he was born in 1924. So his birthday is September 24th, 1924, and he was born in a cotton patch. And so I think, Dr. Weddington always, he'll tease me about his age, but I think he is 89 years young. And I think that he looks very well. And I also think a secret to his longevity is that he ate collard greens. They grew collard greens. And my great-grandparents ate collard greens and cornbread every day, and they lived well into their late 80s. So I think there's something in the South about cornbread and collard greens. And I think I need to start eating them a little more often. So you get an idea just looking at his family. One of the things that I mentioned before, they had to work very hard. So going back to his grandmother, Viola, she was a midwife. And so she delivered close to 200 babies during the time in Hiram. And another interesting thing is that even though they were poor, in those days, a lot of people didn't really have a poverty type of mindset, because they were rich in love, in family relationships, their faith in God. And so it was interesting when Dr. Weddington explained how there were white sharecroppers in the area too, but there really wasn't a racial barrier that separated them. And so, for instance, Dr. Weddington's grandmother actually made corn cob dogs. And she would give these dolls, she would take dried husks of corn, she would sew together little dresses and give them to the children who didn't have anything for Christmas. So she would give out about 15 dolls during Christmas time. And that was one of the first things that Dr. Weddington recognized as a young boy about how to care for your fellow man, how to be concerned about the welfare of your neighbor. Another funny story that he also has was when one of the white sharecroppers, his wife was getting ready to have a baby, and a lot of times when the wives were getting ready to deliver, they would knock on the door late at night. So when I say late, like midnight. So this one farmer came in one night, he was banging on the door, and he said, "Aunt Viola," and I've lost a little bit of my southern accent, but try to reenact a little bit for you. And he said, "Aunt Viola, that woman of mine about ready to have that young'un." And so then his grandmother got up, late at night in a horse and buggy, and they go, and she delivers the child. And so from there, another important figure that Dr. Weddington had was a white doctor named Dr. George Ragsdale. And Dr. Ragsdale was one of the 3 white doctors in Hiram during this time. And so Dr. Ragsdale actually helped take care of Dr. Weddington's family members when anyone became ill, and particularly his grandmother. And so this is how Dr. Weddington got his inspiration. Now you think, here you have, young black boy, and the term back then, Negro boy as they used, he's picking cotton. But then when he sees the gesture of this white physician coming to take care of his family, he decides by looking at him that I can do that too. And you think about that in the 30s during the Great Depression, and you have a black boy in the cotton field looking at this white doctor and saying, I can also go into the medical profession. So what ends up happening with Dr. Ragsdale is that he would allow Dr. Weddington to carry little packages. He would also let him carry his medicine bag. And so just through that small gesture is what was enough to give Dr. Weddington that inspiration. Another thing that also propelled him to think that he could be more than a field hand is when he delivered the Pittsburgh Courier, which is one of the black newspapers which still is being published today. And so in the Pittsburgh Courier, he was getting about a nickel, for each paper that he delivered. But what was important is that when he read through the paper, he saw people who looked like him. So he saw black businessmen, he saw, for instance, owners of Negro League baseball teams, musicians. So when he saw people of color also doing well, that's also when he decided to say, my destiny is not going to be a field hand. So that in the first, as you see, he had a very strong family structure, and that was his support system. Okay, we'll move on to Morehouse College. And Dr. Weddington is a Morehouse man. Definitely, he fits that to the T. And growing up, I always used to hear stories about Morehouse men, just how well educated they were, how well read they were, how well traveled they were. And Dr. Weddington definitely stepped into that. Looking at, this is Dr. Weddington at about 20 years of age. And he is doing some lab work, as you see. And they had a nickname for him. They called him the Rube with the Tube. And, and so he often says he was very fortunate that things didn't blow up in his face while he was doing work. And how this is another, as I tell you how he got to Morehouse, again, just by faith. He wrote a letter to Dr. Charles Hubert in 1940, who was the interim president of Morehouse at the time. And then by the time Dr. Weddington got there for his freshman year, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that name, a giant in education in black history. So Dr. Weddington wrote a letter to Dr. Hubert, who'd come out to preach a revival in the spring. It was in April of 1941. And so Dr. Hubert responds and tells Dr. Weddington that he got him a job cleaning the wax off of the floors. And the first dormitory that Dr. Weddington was assigned to was Sale Hall, which is spelled S-A-L-E, and is still a building on Morehouse's campus. So can you imagine beginning your college career cleaning wax on your knees on the dormitory floor? That was one of the ways that he was able to pay for his tuition. Another thing that he did that was really interesting in doing the research, he went to, after his freshman year, he went to Simsbury, Connecticut, and he worked on the Coleman Brothers tobacco farm. And when I was doing the research on this, I also found out that Dr. Martin Luther King also worked on one of the Coleman Brothers tobacco farms as well. Now, Dr. King was about 4 years behind Dr. Weddington in class. So Dr. Weddington had left for Howard University by the time Dr. King got to Morehouse. But I thought that was an interesting connection there with the history. And so what happened with the tobacco is that they would have young men from historically black colleges, so you had Morehouse, Clark, Tuskegee, Alabama State, schools like that. Young men would come up and pick tobacco, and it was called shade tobacco. So in those days, working on a tobacco farm, they had to slide up and down the tobacco rows on their butts. And while they were sliding on their butts, they would pick the leaves. So that was very different work from picking cotton. But that also served as a way for him to help pay his tuition through Morehouse. One of the, I think, most significant stories that Dr. Weddington shared about Morehouse is how his freshman year, it almost seemed impossible that he would become a doctor because he was struggling badly in biology. So by the time the first semester was completed, he received a D. And so, being in trouble, one professor, and I know that students here, you can probably name a professor, a high school teacher, or maybe going all the way back to elementary school, someone who took the time with you to mentor you. And that's what happened with Dr. Weddington. Dr. Finley took Dr. Weddington under his wing and began to personally tutor him. And in those days, professors, I think, were a little more accessible than they are now. Dr. Weddington was able to walk over to Dr. Finley's house, have dinner with Dr. Finley and his wife. And so by the time he got done with the first year of school, all of his grades were at least a B or higher. So Dr. Finley was the one in the middle there who really helped propel him forward. This gentleman on the right side here, this is one of Dr. Weddington's uncles, Uncle Ralph Weddington, whom Dr. Weddington stayed with for a very short time. He had also a funny story. His uncle Ralph, his children went to the prestigious Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta. So Dr. Weddington was teased by his cousins. They called him country, and he was not used to a lot of what we take for granted a lot today. So they had indoor plumbing. They didn't have an outhouse like they did in Hiram. And Dr. Weddington, growing up, he had to take baths in what was called a tin tub. And you couldn't sit down in a tub. You know how today we just let Calgon take us away or whatever we like to do when we relax in the tub. Well, in a tin tub, you had to stand up or you had to be on your knees. So there was no sitting down, no relaxing. And so when he got to his uncle's house, he was having to make some adjustments, so his cousins teased him. So then he moved in with another relative, his cousin Johnny Gilbert. And a funny story about his cousin Johnny is that they called him a jackleg preacher. Now in the South, a jackleg preacher was someone who didn't pastor a church. So that person would go from church to church, and preach revivals or whenever he was invited. So he stayed with his cousin Johnny throughout his Morehouse years. In the middle there, and this is Dr. Weddington right there, that is his Morehouse graduation. So that is 1944, and he was able to finish Morehouse in 3 years because he was able to pass what was called a medical aptitude test. And so he had another mentor as a student who was named Clyde Phillips. They took the test, and he was able to graduate in 3 years. And so then from there, he moves on to Howard University. So in addition to being a Morehouse man, he's also a Howard Bison, and Howard alumni are also very proud. And so at Howard, as you see this picture, this is Dr. Weddington's graduation in 1948. So that's his graduation photo. Just a few words about Howard. Dr. Weddington studied under 2 medical giants at Howard. One, Dr. Charles Drew, whom you all know was the inventor of the blood bank for the preservation of plasma. The other was Dr. William Montague Cobb, who was the first African American to earn a PhD in physical anthropology. So those two were also very, they had a huge influence. Dr. Cobb, as Dr. Weddington describes in his book, was a little more conversational than Dr. Drew. So Dr. Cobb would have students come to his home, he would talk with them, and one of the studies some of you who are currently students at Ohio State now may have heard of, he did a study back in 1936 called A Race in Runners. And this was a study on Jesse Owens. And so Dr. Cobb was one of the first people to dispel the myths about Black athletic superiority. So these were the types of people that Dr. Weddington was able to learn from. And so in moving from Howard, this photo is Dr. Weddington at Kansas City General Hospital number 2. And so this was during his internship after he graduated from Howard University. And the bottom picture, this is the house of his in-laws, soon to be once he got to Kansas City, John and Myra Walls. And so they are the grandparents of Kim Weddington. And I wanted to mention this. This is also significant history. In 1948, in the April edition of Ebony magazine, John and Myra Walls were featured. They owned a trucking company. And it was one of the largest trucking companies in the Midwest back then for African Americans. And at the time, the company was worth close to $100,000. So you think, this is the 1940s, and you have a black business of this magnitude. And so one of Dr. Weddington's friends, one of Kansas City's first black radio personalities, a man named Herschel Cannon, he befriended Dr. Weddington and was married to one who would actually, they would later become in-laws. And so he would always take Dr. Weddington when he and his wife would go out on picnics or to the movies, and he would always bring a single young lady. But Dr. Weddington had eyes for Mr. Cannon's wife's younger sister, so the lovely Patsy Noreen Walls. And so in the book, we talk about, back in those days when women were trying to play hard to get, they would say, oh, he's not paying him no mind. And so that's what she would do. Every time Dr. Weddington would ask her out, she would refuse. So when she refused, he would bring other dates to make her jealous. And I have to say, in Dr. Weddington's day, when a young man wanted to court you, he went all out. And so Dr. Weddington finally got a yes, and they went to the movies, and about half a year later, they were engaged. And so he pursued her. Another thing that I like that as we're writing the book, he talked about how he was brought up to respect young women, how he opened the door for them, how he complimented a woman on how well she dressed, how well she looked. You took her home at a decent hour. And he talked about being a gentleman. So that is also another lesson that young people can get from reading his book. So as you get down to after they become married, then Dr. Weddington moves on to Marietta, Georgia. So he goes back home in a way. And this is a photo of Dr. Weddington as a young doctor in Marietta, Georgia. One of his crowning achievements in Marietta was that he became a member of the Cobb County Medical Association, the first African American member in 1952 at the age of 28. And the story that he tells about that is he inquired of his white colleagues how he could join this society, and so they were open. He was expecting resistance. And here now we're in the 50s, but we're still in Georgia, so it's still pretty much segregated. And so when he inquires of his colleagues, they say, oh yes, come on. So he goes to a dinner at a country club. Now, if you can imagine being a black man being invited to a country club in Georgia in 1952. So when he walks in, the black servers look at him and they think, oh, this is newly hired help. And so once he explains that he is a guest and not part of the help, they ask him to come in. And when Dr. Weddington expressed how he was just waiting while they were talking and eating for a condescending remark, a racist remark, it never happened. And so then after he was granted membership into the society, and so one of the white doctors on the night that he was inducted said, we've made history. This is our first Negro physician to be admitted into the Cobb County Medical Society. And I think that speaks volumes too as to in the South, every encounter wasn't always a racist one. And so Dr. Weddington was very fortunate to have white colleagues who supported him, where most people would have thought that they would not have, but he had that support. The other picture here is Dr. Weddington was a very busy man while he was in Marietta. So in addition to having his practice, he also had a club. This was called the Barber City Lodge Elks Club. He also had a drugstore and a pawn shop. And in addition to managing all of that, he was the only black doctor in the area that stretched as far north as Chattanooga, Tennessee. So his workload was becoming one that he described a little bit unbearable. But Dr. Weddington admits that he struggled with this a little bit. So if you can imagine, you're the only black doctor, that's like about a 100-mile stretch from where he was to Tennessee. People are constantly calling on you. So people would come to his office, by car, sometimes busloads. He felt compelled to take calls very late at night when he would go and see about someone if they were sick. And so when he was doing all of that with his practice and then trying to juggle these stores, it became a lot to handle. So Dr. Weddington in the book, he says, God stepped in and he took me and my family out of Georgia. So he comes to Ohio. This is where the Ohio history sets in. This photo is of Dr. Weddington when he was a captain, fourth in command at Lockwood Air Force Base. And so he came here as a result of the Korean War. And so he was at first, he thought he was going to be able to remain in Georgia. Plans changed. And so, in the South, how we say God works in mysterious ways. So he ended up in Columbus. And he was actually the youngest black doctor when he got here. So he came up, he was called up in 1954. And so on the base, one of the stories that he also tells is how when he was in charge of seeing outpatients, and during this time, his tenure there before he was released, he delivered close to 800 babies with one of his partners named Dr. Duger. And so in that time, while he was delivering all these babies, there was a young white woman who came in one day from Mississippi. And so she was, still a little prejudiced. So she didn't want to see Dr. Weddington. And so she told the officer, I do not want the services of a Negro doctor. And so then they explained to her, well, this is the only doctor you can see because he's in charge of assigning out patients. So she decided, well, okay, I'll go through with it. And Dr. Weddington, in the book, he says, to himself, well, should I flex my muscle and let her know that I'm the big cheese? And then he thought against that. And so he gave her one of the most thorough exams that she ever had. And she became one of his patients. And so later, when he opens his practice over in the Mount Vernon area in Columbus, she followed him, as a lot of other wives who were on the base. So it was very interesting. In the black community in Mount Vernon, they would see this white woman drive up in her fancy Lincoln, and she'd get out of the car to go in, and that just amazed the residents there. But Dr. Weddington shared this story later on with students who would sometimes complain a bit too much. They would say, and many years later when he became part of the medical faculty at Ohio State, some black students would come into his office and they would say, well, my white professor is not treating me fairly. And Dr. Weddington knew that some of them were using that as a crutch to be lazy and not to push themselves. So he would say, life's not a bed of roses, learn to deal with it. And in having that response, he explained in the book that he wanted them to really work hard and not just say, it's because I'm a black medical student and this is why things aren't working out the way that I thought they would. So Dr. Weddington, I think, had great discernment there to see that with some students just were trying to use it as an excuse to get by in some cases. When you look at the other two pictures here, as we'll move on, this is Patsy Noreen Walls. This is Kim's mother. And this picture was taken in their house in Franklin Park South. So some of you are probably familiar with that area of town. And this picture at the bottom, this is one of the Cavalier Club galas. And so, as you can see, the Weddingtons were very stylish, and they went to a lot of black tie affairs. So as Dr. Weddington began to work his way up into the community, as he began his practice and serving the Mount Vernon area, many people came to rely on him. And so he didn't have quite the same type of pressure as he did in Marietta, but he still had a very large patient load. Okay, we get to Ohio State, and so we're fast forwarding through the years a little bit. This photo here was taken in the 90s when Dr. Weddington was receiving his Distinguished Faculty Service Award. One of Dr. Weddington's, actually I can say probably his specialty while he was at Ohio State is that he took a lot of time to study and do research on the needs of the urban community and also people who were poor and uninsured. So Dr. Weddington, I think another thing that people have often told me that's touching about the book is that he never turned away anyone who was in need. If they could not pay, he took care of them. And so as he was reflecting throughout the years, he lost thousands of dollars because he felt, as he said in the book, that it was sinful for him to turn someone away. So of course today he also explained that he understands that a primary care physician like himself today probably wouldn't be able to take care of patients the way that he did, and that doctors have to earn a living, but he really felt that it was his service to be his brother and sister's keeper. And so in the urban community, one of the things that Dr. Weddington did, he developed the Hilltop Center, that was in the 70s, and he also looked at preventive care a lot. So we hear a lot of talk about preventive care now because with health care, so many people trying to get it and so many people who are not insured, Dr. Weddington wanted to stress diet. One of the things he used to do is go to a lot of the black churches in Columbus to talk about diet and talk about exercise. And he was doing this in the 80s. The picture here, this is Dr. Weddington at a reunion at Morehouse in the 1980s. And these are two distinguished faculty members at Ohio State. This is Dr. Max Stewart, who is Professor Emeritus from the College of Education, and Dr. Ted McDaniel, who is Professor of Music and also Professor of African American Studies. And so this photo was also taken in the 80s, and they called themselves the Morehouse Mafia. And, and they still, to this day, refer to themselves that way. This photo, this is Dr. Weddington and his wife, Caroline Weddington. Kim's mother passed away in 1968, and Dr. Weddington was blessed to marry again. This is when they were, this is a photo in the 90s with medical students. And so another hardship while we were working through the book is that Mrs. Caroline Weddington passed away suddenly in 2010. So that also kind of had a setback. So Dr. Weddington, even through that, having been widowed twice, still remains strong, in faith. He talks about when Kim's mother passed away, how the prayers of the community pulled him through. And one of the things that he always prided himself on was that he was the friend of his patients. So his patients could talk to him, and what he tried to teach his students at Ohio State was that when you are looking at a diagnosis, also begin to look at the patient as a whole. So begin to understand the life of this person, where he or she comes from, their background, if they're struggling, why. And so he also acted as a counselor too, as well as a physician. And certainly last but not least, this photo was taken in 2012 with his daughter Kim and students from the Weddington Society. So the Weddington Society of Future Physicians was named after Dr. Weddington. And so he had a ball with them, as you can see. And in ending here, and I'll let Kim speak, is that Dr. Weddington truly believes in the phrase we're all familiar with, paying forward. And even in our interview today with the College of Arts and Sciences, he talked about how he just wanted to be an example for the generation coming behind. Also to let people know that if you work hard, if you really push yourself, you can make it, no matter what obstacles you face. And so that's still his message even today when people ask him about his life, the hardships, because it wasn't easy, but in persevering through all of that, he always comes back to his faith and says, I'm very blessed and I'm very fortunate, and that God made a way. So before the Weddington Society comes up, before you guys come up, I wanted Kim to just say a few words, if you would like, about what it was like to watch your father growing up in the Mount Vernon area as he took care of them.
Good evening, how are you? Good evening, how's everyone this evening on this cold night? I learned something this evening myself, and I've read the book several times, several times, but I learned this evening that he was the youngest black doctor when he first arrived. Now, in 2014, he's the oldest living black doctor at Clemens Ohio. Wow, that's something. Well, what I can say is that I truly bless God for my father. Reading the book myself, I learned a lot that I didn't know. And then I spent hours with Jessica telling about, in days and hours and days, telling about the life on Franklin Park South when I was a little girl. And watching him make house calls, and on Sunday after we go to church, we had to go to St. Anthony's Hospital, which is now OSU East, and then we'd have to go down to Grant Hospital, and we'd have to go to Mercy Hospital. I mean, we did all kinds of hospitals on Sundays. And we had to go to church, and we had to make these hospital rounds, or else we didn't have no dinner. Because we didn't go to dinner until after we made these hospital rounds. So that's one of the things, I was his, my sister and I, Cynthia, we were his coattails, and we had to tag along behind him. I also was stuck in the office as a young girl. I guess I started being his assistant, receptionist, whatever, at the age of 12, when I was able to, make a little bit of money. He had me in the office. And, I'm like, why is he getting on me all the time when he has a nurse, a real receptionist, and a real secretary? He's getting on me about not answering the phone. I'm like, you better talk to these chickies who you're really paying. But I spent years in the office. I grew up as a doctor's daughter's brat, I guess. I followed him everywhere he went. And the years of Franklin Park, they were very memorable. Very memorable. Not just because of my dad, but my mother made him his wife, his first wife. Those years, the Weddington house was the party house. We had a big swimming pool in the backyard, and every 4th of July, every black person in Columbus was over at our house for a big old barbecue, and all their kids, and our house was like just the party house. And we lived right across the street from Franklin Park. So after everybody would eat and everything, all the kids wanted to go over to the park to watch the fireworks. So, we all would go over there to watch the fireworks and everything. But I remember my dad in his shorts and his flowered shirts and his white tennis shoes, or just his sandals with the socks all the way up to his thighs. Out there on that barbecue pit, just cooking those ribs. He would start, say 4th of July was on a Saturday, he'd start on a Wednesday. And there's just a lot of good memories. As I grew older, as you read the book, if you haven't read the book yet, when you do read the book, my tribute to him was The Wind Beneath My Wings. I struggle badly accepting the fact that he remarried again. And I had not too much of good times around those times. And like I said, I struggled badly, tremendously. I went through some things that only God and my dad could get me out of. He's my best friend. We argue like cats and dogs now because I stay with him, and sometimes he listens and most of the time he doesn't. So I'm like, whatever. But he's my best friend. He's an excellent doctor, and I really wish that when the young medical students, when they graduate and they get to become doctors, that they try to be a little bit better than what sometimes the doctors are today. Because the doctors today, they don't have any bedside manner. They don't have any patience. And there's really no compassion. It's all about that buck. And if Daddy were still a young man, I really wish he was still a doctor here in Columbus today. You know, people, like they said, people didn't have to worry about going to see the doctor if they were sick and if they didn't have any money, because Daddy would look at them anyway. He'd take care of them anyway. I remember times of wanting to go home at, you know, it'd be like 9 o'clock at night. We'd still be at the office. People still knocking on the back door. I'm like, if you don't stop letting these folks in this back door so we can go home. But that's just how he was. His door was open always. I remember walking up and down the streets of Mount Vernon. Back then it was safe. And he'd send me, I was the lunch girl. I had to go and pick up everybody's cheeseburgers at the Navi Food Bar or over at the Chesapeake, whatever, just Chesapeake and just every place. And then he had little ladies bringing me chitlins and pies and all this food at the office. I mean, everybody just loved it. And you know, all I just wanted to do was just go home. You know, we work, let's just go home. But, you know, he's blessed. I thank God for his longevity. I thank God for everything that he's been through, because he's paved the way for a lot of us. And he's just made it easy for me. And I bless God for that. That's all I can say.
Okay, now we'd like to have the students from the Weddington Society come up along with their advisor.
Good evening. My name is Fern Cheek. I'm research librarian and associate professor here at the Health Sciences Library here on the campus of Ohio State. Maybe a year or so ago, a good friend of mine, Mrs. Bernice McDaniel, who was the graduate advisor in arts and sciences, told me that she was thinking about retiring. And she had been the advisor to this group for about 25 years. So she retired last May, and I had the honor of becoming an advisor to this group. So I'm very honored to be here tonight to actually meet Dr. Weddington and his daughter. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization. It was co-founded in 1992 by Dr. Weddington and Dr. Liebert Morris as the minority doctors of tomorrow. When he retired from OSU College of Medicine in 1994, the organization was renamed the Weddington Society, Weddington Society for Future Healthcare Professionals. The purpose of the Weddington Society is to provide support and assistance for any undergraduate student in pre-health programs at The Ohio State University. The group strives to enhance communication among undergraduates, medical students, and faculty while facilitating the academic environment of students who are preparing for careers in various health fields. Now I'd like to introduce our president, Hazel, who would like to share a few comments.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Estelle Botcherbeck, and I'm a senior and the current president of the Weddington Society for Future Healthcare Professionals here at The Ohio State University. It is an honor to be with you tonight and to celebrate Dr. Weddington's incredible life achievements, and I'm humbled to represent his ongoing legacy in the work we do in the society of his name. The Weddington Society is an incredible society in the sense that our members are ambitious, intelligent, and some of the most proactive students we have on campus. The society exposes its members to clinicals at the Webster Medical Center. Our members volunteer internationally for Project for Nicaragua and volunteer to clean up the streets in Columbus after game days. Our members are resilient. They work hard in school and work hard in getting exposure to health sciences by shadowing and volunteering. And of course, our members go into medical, nursing, allied health, dentistry, and optometry schools with the support and the resources we're able to provide, all thanks to Dr. Weddington Society. I have been in the society for 4 years, and in those years I saw incredible growth and maturity of our members. The society is one of the most welcoming clubs we have here at OSU, and I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of it. Thank you, Dr. Weddington.
Okay, now we will take questions from the audience that you would like to ask Dr. Weddington. Any questions or comments? Okay, yes.
Hey, so what drew you to family medicine as opposed to different specialties like emergency medicine and pediatrics?
I went into family medicine because in my area there was no black physician there was no physician that really took care of black patients very well. And it was through the family medicine department that I was able to develop some efforts, some steam, and some help in providing health care for many of the poor patients in the area of my city, county, in Marietta, Georgia, Hiram, Paulding County, Georgia, and even into the area of Mount Vernon, and as well as into Ohio State area. That there were still patients that were poor, that were black, that I felt got improper that didn't get the necessary help there. And it was through those days, my mind is a little adult at 90 years of age, but that's as far as I can remember.
If I would, because I think it's very important. I don't want us to skip over this. I think it's really important that we understand that when he says he did this, what he actually did was create an entirely new specialty within the American Medical Association. He really moved away from, saying he had to specialize and being in isolation. And what he did on Mount Vernon laid the groundwork, along with his research, in actually opening an entirely new area of medicine. And he was able to formalize it through his research. So not only is he the youngest or the oldest, but he actually provided intellectual value to the practice of medicine, not only in the United States, but around the world. And I really want us to acknowledge that, in addition to, the family history and the community history, because I think we really neglect the intellectual addition that African Americans have made to society as a whole. And I just didn't want us to pass that.
I wanted to ask, what's one piece of advice or one thing that kept you motivated while you were doing? I know you said a lot of different pearls in the book, but if you could narrow it down to one thing that we should all keep in our hearts.
That motivated me.
Yes, to stay motivated and to keep moving forward.
I think that the one thing that kept me motivated was from the Red Hills of Georgia as a black person, this is a black boy, country boy in Georgia in the days of unpleasant situations for blacks, the days of post-slavery and the days of Ku Klux Klan and the days when often the minorities did not have the opportunity to get the best of health care. And I felt that not for any big markers or somebody applauded for what I had done, I was looking to do, but because I was able to come out of the earth, the salted earth of Georgia, and provide my health care knowledge and what I learned and kept trying to learn during the years that I was in Morehouse College, Howard University, and the Kansas City General Hospital, bring that knowledge back to those people that need it the most.
To answer your question, it was God, his trust in God and his faith in God that motivated him and his family.
Okay, yes.
Why do you think people, African Americans nowadays have been more back then? I mean, back then people are unapologetic. Why do you think that's different now? Now people are getting weed and stuff in their hair and doing all this drugs and stuff. Why do you think it's different now than it was back then?
And what she's asking is, why do you think African Americans are different now? In terms of, do you also mean like their pride and their self-worth?
Yes.
Okay, and having pride in themselves today versus in your day?
Pride in themselves, did you say that it's worse?
Well, this young lady wants to know, why is there a difference now? It seems as if, I think in her opinion, that black people don't have as much pride as they used to when you were young.
I really can't answer that question. I know that in my day, it was a struggle, and sometimes struggle makes a stronger person. And what I came through, what I came up under, gave me a sense that deeply seated my desires to go back and do the best that I could to help those people that were coming through a struggle, whichever it was, wherever it came from, black or white, to try to develop faith in God, develop a knowledge that other people came through the struggle and other people are probably coming through the struggle, and that there is a purpose in the struggle because it makes you stronger. It makes you stronger. I thank God for my struggle. Sometimes it didn't seem right. It wasn't right. Sometimes it was hard, but it gave me muscle, brains to overcome. Thank you.
I have time for one more question.
Sweetheart, in other words, today's generation and my generation, the generations that are coming after him, everything's given to the young people today. They don't have to work for anything. They don't want to work for anything. So they don't have any desire to really want want to be like a Dr. Weddington, So I know that's even for myself, I didn't have to really work hard for anything because it was given. And now as an adult, I know what a struggle is. I mean, I got to work for everything because there ain't nothing given to you. So that, when you asked about you said the weaves and all that stuff, baby, you see it? And people, the world goes around. Everything goes around in a circle. If you see that you notice that pants are starting to be bell bottoms again, and high wedge shoes and things, everything comes around in a complete circle. So, I guess that's that.
We have time for one more question. Does anyone have one last question? Okay, yes, sir.
First of all, I want to say, Dr. Weddington, thank you for your decades of service. I haven't had the book, but I'm going to get the book and I'm going to read it. The question I have in terms of your longevity, we hear a lot of things about wellness and the diet and all that. What would you say would be one or two things that have sustained you for over 80 years?
Okay. He wants to know about your longevity and what has sustained you. Diet.
My longevities come from a blessing from God, my faith in God, my trust in Him, and other than that, the things that you've heard said about me is not for what I've done so much. God has blessed me in many ways. It's a blessing of the Almighty. That's it.
All right, please give Dr. Weddington and Ken Weddington. So in a moment, we're going to, we have some copies of the book that we're going to raffle them off. So we're going to keep you here for a little bit longer for those that can stay and hopefully win the raffle. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that Dr. Johnson had mentioned about Dr. Weddington. Especially for the students in here, aspiration. Just being able to think beyond your current reality. And so once you read the book and you get a chance to really see what Dr. Weddington's life was like as a kid growing up, and to see what he dreamed of doing, just being able to think and live without limits, doing what it takes. And so when I read about cleaning wax on floors, I'm still thinking like a mom. I'm not thinking actually getting on your knees on a daily basis and then going to school full time. And so again, as I was reading this book too, I was thinking, wow, I really did a lot of work when I was an undergrad. I had a couple of jobs. No, this doesn't compare. This does not compare. Willingness to be mentored. And so when I had did some prior research on Dr. Drew, so when I read about that Dr. Weddington was mentored by Dr. Cobb and Dr. Drew, those are giants in the field of medicine. And at that time, they weren't necessarily giants right then and there, but you never know what people are going to be or how they're going to turn out. And so just having the willingness to be mentored is very important. Being a trailblazer. Everywhere Dr. Weddington went, especially after he finished his residency, he was a trailblazer. Pursuing the country club in Cobb County, the average person would have just written that off and said, this isn't possible. This is the Deep South. This is the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Dr. Weddington didn't do that. Enterprising. I don't know how you found so many hours in a day to do all the things that you did while you were in Georgia and here in Columbus. That's amazing. Being immersed in your work, especially for the students here. Dr. Weddington immersed himself in the field of medicine, the field of family medicine, and like this woman here so eloquently stated, just opened up a whole new area within medicine that wasn't even tapped before. And last, and I feel the most important, kindness. Kindness. Throughout his book, with that kindness is tied to not forgetting where he came from. And I feel throughout that book, constantly Hiram, Georgia is on his mind as he's going about his work, whether it's in Columbus, whether it was in Marietta, Georgia. So I'll stop right there because I could keep going because I read the book. And it is a pleasure, it's a joy. I'm doing a PhD program right now, and I was getting down on myself, like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm working full-time, I have a 2-year-old daughter, I'm trying to do a PhD. I read the book, and I was actually a little ashamed of myself. And so what we're going to do right here now is we're going to raffle off some of the books that we have. And so if I can have one of the students, if you can bring the books over this way.